So here is a trick question. I'm asking you, who do you think has been the most important personality in the subcontinent in our lifetimes? Important in the sense, important obviously at any point of time will be the leader of India, not like that. But important in the sense of the person's impact on the present when the person was there, the past, that is after the person goes away, and the future of this subcontinent. Now, many names will come. Some of you will say Jawaharlal Nehru. I'll just say that that was too early in our lifetimes. And again, Jawaharlal Nehru will probably fail in this competition. Then you might say Indira Gandhi. Yes, she did create Bangladesh. She changed the subcontinent, and that's her enduring legacy. Bangladesh now is doing very well, etc., etc. Okay, so let's leave her there. Who else is there? When you look at all the rest, I will mention a name to you. And that name is General Zia-ul-Haq. Now, General Zia-ul-Haq, and you might ask me, why the hell are you mentioning General Zia-ul-Haq today? Just because you like to talk about Pakistan often? No. This is the 45th anniversary of the military coup he staged on 5th of July 1977, throwing out Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's government. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto it was who actually chose Zia, superseding at least half a dozen other generals to become chief, because he used to find Zia the most obsequious in his presence all the time. He used to talk to Zia in a very ridiculing manner. Bhutto wasn't a nice guy with people. He could be very rude, he could be very dismissive. He could also be quite uncivil with people who he thought he was more powerful, or people who he thought he had power over. So he did treat Zia like that. Zia took it and looked like quite unctuous. So he made Zia the chief. Zia had a distinguished background in the army. He was from one of the Pakistani army's more fancied regiments, the Guides Cavalry, part of Frontier Force. Guides Cavalry, as you can figure out, was a tank regiment. Zia was also born in India, Indian part of the subcontinent, in Jalandhar. He went to Delhi's St. Stephen's College. And he was a Punjabi. He was a Punjabi from what's called as the Arai community. So Bhutto thought that this man, because he's been so unctuous, he will remain unctuous like this. And what happened immediately as he took over power? In Pakistan, it doesn't matter who becomes army chief. Lots of Pakistani leaders have actually dipped deep down to think of the mildest sounding person from their point of view to be the army chief. They've superseded many, they've given extensions to many, but in the process, they've all turned out to be the army chief, because the power lies in the chair, in the kursi, in the chair of the army chief. Whoever they put there gets that power. So 45 years back, Zia-ul-Haq took over power in Pakistan. You know broadly what happened after that, that he hanged Bhutto soon enough he arrested Bhutto in what is widely believed to be a fake murder charge, and finally, despite a split verdict in the Supreme Court, hanged him quickly with great alacrity, etc. Jailed his wife Nusrat Bhutto and his daughter Benazir, exiled his sons. So basically finished all competition. Now, all of that doesn't make him such a yug purush. Why do you think that he made the most lasting difference to the subcontinent? To our past, not to his past, to our past, to his present, and the history, not just of his country, but also of his nation. Because what he did was, not only he imposed Pakistan's third martial law and the longest martial law. So he ruled between 1977 and late 1988. That's almost 11 years. Not all of that was under martial law, because for some time he brought in that joke of a democracy. He held a kind of a partyless political arrangement where Muhammad Khan Junejo was made the prime minister, and he went around saying that I'm now a titular president like the Queen of England, but actually he controlled all the power. At some point, he got impatient and he threw Junejo out, because as he gave himself power, as he brought in the so-called partyless democracy. Now, partyless democracy is a bit like non-alcoholic beer, isn't it? So he brought in partyless democracy because he used to say elections are great, democracy is great. Every country needs democracy and election. But you know what? Running, jogging, exercising, going to the gym is great. But for that, somebody has to be healthy. If a person is sick, you don't tell that person to start running and exercising. My country is sick. When I nurse my country to health, it will have democracy. So he brought in this democracy, but soon enough he figured out that he was missing all the power he had. So he got rid of him also. So 11 years he ruled and had the longest spell under martial law, had his country under the longest spell with martial law. Now before that, two more martial laws had taken place, and I can just tell you the basic dates. 7th February 1958, Major General Iskandar Mirza, he was not a serving general then, Major General Iskandar Mirza, we've told him about you earlier. He was the great-grandson of Mir Jafar, who in the subcontinent's history is remembered as among its most infamous traitors, the man who betrayed or allegedly betrayed or is said to have betrayed Sirajuddaula in the Battle of Plassey. So he was a great-grandson. He by this time was like the president of Pakistan. So the first martial law in Pakistan was not imposed by a general. It was imposed by a civilian leader, former Major General, who immediately then, who did he appoint as Chief Martial Law Administrator? He appointed Muhammad Ayub Khan, who was the army chief, and soon enough, what happened is what always happens in these cases. Ayub Khan got rid of Iskandar Mirza and himself became the boss. This martial law lasted 4 years. Ayub Khan lifted the martial law in 1962, and he brought in also some facade of some democracy of some kind. He became president first, and he held some kind of a presidential election in 1965. That's a complex story. His rival then was Fatima Jinnah, sister of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and then there were allegations of rigging of election, etc., etc. By that time, Pakistan had become very unhappy, especially because of the costs it paid for launching the 65 war in India and not winning it, which amounted to losing it because it lost the objective. So that was again a period of martial law. The second period of martial law was Yahya Khan, who sort of moved in seamlessly from Ayub onwards. So 1969, 25th of March, Yahya Khan imposed his martial law. It just so happened that exactly 2 years after that, 25th March 1971, he launched his crackdown over East Pakistan, and that led to his end. The day the war ended, the day his army surrendered, he tried to bring in some kind of a constitution, etc., because he was trying to buy some kind of way out of that shame. But nobody bought into that, and he was out, and then came Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Now, Zia-ul-Haq took over from Bhutto in 1977. Under Bhutto, Pakistan got a new constitution in 1973. Zia took over in 1977. And you know what? When he appointed Junejo as the Prime Minister, before he did that, he brought in the 1973 constitution, but with some key amendments. And with those amendments, he gave himself as president the power to hire and fire chief ministers, prime minister, all governments, federal government, central government, and the state governments in Pakistan, provincial governments as they are called. He also gave himself, that is the president, the powers to dismiss any elected parliament or assemblies. So effectively, this became a presidential dictatorship with some kind of an elected government. That damage that he did to Pakistan's polity. One, bringing in a long-lasting martial law, militarizing the Pakistani mind, because the other two before him had not been able to militarize Pakistan's mind. The other thing he did was he Islamized Pakistan's mind. It's a very complex history, but I will try and explain it to you, and that's the reason I thought he is the one who's made the most impact on the subcontinent, at least in our lifetime. So maybe I would say even since 1947, since the partition of the subcontinent. Now, what kind of a character was it? And am I exaggerating in saying that he is probably the most significant personality to have lived through our times in the subcontinent? I can do no better than quote Atal Bihari Vajpayee. When Zia-ul-Haq died in that air crash C-130 in Bahawalpur, I was sent immediately for covering that story, and I had written a cover story for India Today magazine. I'm sharing a link to that article with you. I'm also sharing a screenshot of that article and also the page where I quote in that article Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and we'll circle the quote from Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And listen to Atal Bihari Vajpayee. This is what is said in 1988. This is August of 1988. He said कि वो असली गुरु था. That is Zia-ul-Haq. He said वो असली गुरु था. उसने अमेरिका को नचाया, रूस को चकराया और हमको सताया. Which means he was a real master, real guru who led the Americans on a merry dance, who befuddled the Russians, actually defeated them in the end, who befuddled the Russians, and who gave us so much trouble. So Vajpayee said, वो असली गुरु था, उसने अमेरिका को नचाया, रूस को चकराया और हमको सताया. So that was the kind of character he was, because he built a legacy that now casts a shadow not just on the subcontinent, definitely not just on Pakistan, and not just on the subcontinent, but on the entire Islamic world, and I would go beyond that, on the entire world. Because look at his luck. He takes over, and soon enough, just when he's getting into trouble, he's becoming unpopular. Some people, including the clergy, are beginning to complain about him, that he's come and taken over power. See, it was still time when Pakistan army had not become that popular with the people of Pakistan, because in 1971, they had lost a war. They had lost more than half their country. But just then, the Soviets walked into Afghanistan. As that happened, he pushed his country into the jihad. He became a frontline state. He tied up with the Americans. That's why Atal ji ne bola America ko nachaya, because Americans realized that if they had to defeat Russia in the Cold War by using Afghans as their proxy, then they needed Pakistan to be in front. But you know what? It was one thing to be just cynical, but Zia was more than cynical. Zia was a genuine Islamist. He was a genuine Islamist, and he saw this as a real jihad. And I know it from people who worked closely with him, because for many years I was part of the Track 2 circuit, where many retired Indian and Pakistani generals, air marshals, top civil servants also used to participate. So I heard from people who worked closely with him that when he first became the chief, he wasn't that religious. He was religious, but not that religious. But when he killed Bhutto and got away with it, people around him said, Dekha, God's on your side. God has chosen to send you now. And God it is who protected you. Everybody said, if you hang Bhutto, there'll be trouble. Nothing happened. Then the Russians came into Afghanistan. The Soviets came into Afghanistan. So again, people around him convinced him, or the conservatives around him convinced him that, see, this is what Allah said. This is why Allah specially sent you. You were a junior guy. Bhutto superseded half a dozen others to make you chief. Then you killed Bhutto, got him out of the way, nothing happened. Now Soviets have come in. So a jihad is needed, and because somebody was needed to lead this jihad, Allah positioned you here. And he became more and more and more fundamentalist going ahead after that. Now the forces he created, the jihadi groups he created, the Nizam-e-Mustafa, he said he brought into Pakistan. He declared Pakistani parliament to be Majlis-e-Shura. He put all kinds of further bans on Ahmadiyas. Now, I will give you a little bit of history there, because it's not as if he started that. Bhutto it is who had started this Islamization. Unfortunately, it wasn't a general, but he took it to another level. And what happened? As the Mujahideen won that victory, Zia emerged as a great hero and inspirational figure among the jihadi lord. And then the mindset of jihad, that if you can defeat a big superpower with jihad, you can defeat anybody, because you know why? You've got divine help, you've got divine intervention on your side. So he's the one who left behind this jihadi culture, not just in Pakistan, but even the pan-Islamic terror machine came out of this, emerged from this. Al-Qaeda, ultimately Al-Qaeda morphed into ISIS, etc., etc. And don't tell me that I am exaggerating, because remember where Al-Qaeda came up. It came up in the same Afpak region. And then later this morphed into ISIS, because this victory led by ul-Haq of the Mujahideen, of the Islamic fighters, of the Islamic Jihad against a big superpower, spread the word everywhere, first of all, that your religion is so supreme that you can defeat a superpower, also the big superpower. But the second thing was, Afghan war drew fighters or jihadis from the entire Islamic world. Not only were they giving money, but many fighters were coming in. After all, who was Osama bin Laden? He was a Saudi. And there were others who came from distant Islamic countries, even those not from Islamic countries, but of the Islamic faith. So this became a kind of university of jihad. And he's the founding chancellor of that university of jihad. And inspirationally and in soul and spirit, he still remains that. Again, in Pakistan, he founded what I might call Ziaism. So Ziaism was a new definition of Pakistani nationalism, which is built around military power, which is built around conservative, puritanical Sunni Islam, and which is also built around military superiority and a mindset of permanent enmity with India. In fact, in that cover story I wrote on him, when he died, Mushahid Hussain, who was then the editor of The Muslim and later became a politician, there is a quote from him, and he says that he is the first leader who had a subcontinent policy. First leader in Pakistan, and also on India, he was trapping India in a pincer. So he had the sharpest India policy. So almost everything he did has endured philosophically, and every leader after him has tried to put the clock back on Zia, but they have failed to do so. So Zia may have gone, but Ziaism it is which now rules Pakistan, whether you like it or not. That's a reality. Now, what kind of a leader was Zia? So once again, if I go back to all India Today stories, so there were many jokes about him. The great thing about the Pakistanis is they have the best jokes about their dictators. They have the best jokes. They also tell them with abandon. I suppose when you have restrictions on free speech, as they had in Zia's times, in fact, in Zia's times, journalists were treated very rudely. He had come in saying that in 90 days I'll hold an election and restore the constitution, etc. He did no such thing. Under him, 11 journalists were convicted by military courts and 4 of them were flogged in public. And yet, people told us great jokes about him. So one of those jokes used to be that Junejo, who he became prime minister, like his bonsai prime minister, he was having tea with him in his garden at the army house in Rawalpindi, and there was a plate of biscuits on their table. So a crow came, picked one biscuit and ran away. So Zia frowned at the crow. Zia again resumed talking with Junejo or listening to Junejo. The crow came and picked up another biscuit. Then Zia said to the crow, listen, don't do it again, because I'm going inside the house to get my shotgun. If you do it again, I'll come and shoot you with a shotgun. So Zia turned around to go inside the house. The crow dived in again, maybe to pick up one more. Zia turned around, pulled out a pistol from his pocket and shot the crow. So what was the lesson of the story? The story was, Kehta kuch hai, karta kuch hai. He says one thing but does something else. So that's the kind of image Zia had built. This is part of a published story. Now, why do we say that Zia was the father of the jihadist culture, not just in Pakistan or the subcontinent, but in the entire world? One, because he made a jihad win against a superpower. Number two, because he got the other superpower, that's America with its Western allies, got so deeply invested in jihadist powers. Not until Osama bin Laden's people hit the World Trade Towers in 2001, towards the end of 2001, September 2001. Not until then did the Americans and the Western powers pull away from their investments. They did not disinvest until then from the jihadist groups. It's only after they got hit that they began worrying about it. Until then, India had been hit several times by the same forces. The bombings of Bombay in 1993 were definitely linked to the same forces. After that, Dawood Ibrahim led it up in Karachi. Eventually, also just before that, in the same year, India had had the bombing of the J&K assembly by a human bomb, driving a car laden with explosives. That was very much a part of the same jihad, etc. In fact, when that happened, Americans were so insensitive that the Secretary of State then, that is General Powell, Colin Powell, he said, an attack has been carried out in a Government of India facility. That's the expression used for the assembly. So until September of 2001, Americans and the Western powers were deeply invested in this jihadi culture. That was Zia's doing. That is the seed that Zia's planted. And that's the reason we say Zia it is who built modern jihad, and Zia it is who left behind him the Kalashnikov culture in Pakistan, the drug addiction, drug smuggling and drug addiction in Pakistan, and third, Islamization. And I will, in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I will tell you about what happened with Islamization in Pakistan. When Pakistan was founded by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he had not imagined Pakistan to be an Islamic republic. This was a country where the large Muslim majority of the subcontinent will have a country of their own. So there was some privileging of the religion, but this was not to be the Islamic Republic. Now, he found some pushback from the clergy, etc. The clergy said at that point that Pakistan has no justification if it is not an Islamic Republic, etc. But if you see Jinnah's speech on August 11, 1947, in Pakistan's Constituent Assembly, from that speech, he indicates this was a political struggle. This was not about religion. March 1949, however, when the Pakistanis passed what was called as the Objectives Resolution. Their constitution was still in the works, Constituent Assembly was still working. That's when they said our sovereignty belongs to Allah, which means for the first time they admitted that there will be a strong Islamic element to their government or to their state. When this happened, one member of the Constituent Assembly, who was actually a congressman, he said, and that's his exact quote, he said, "You are now leaving the door open for an adventurer," quote, "an adventurer who could claim to be God's appointee." Now, cut to 1977. In 1977, Zia-ul-Haq came in as that apparent appointee of God to make it a truly Islamic country. Otherwise, even under Ayub and Yahya, it was not an Islamic republic. That's a more complex history, and I will tell you about that. After the defeat in 1971, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto inherited a broken, a dismembered, and very dispirited and very angry and very demoralized country. So what did he do? Like all smart, cynical leaders, he found refuge in religion. Now Bhutto, like his two dictatorial predecessors, that is Yahya and Ayub, was not a teetotaler. He was hardly Islamic in his practice, right? These were all whiskey drinkers who drank actually the best brands of whiskey. At that point, good scotch wasn't so easily available in the subcontinent. You had to be very elite and very well connected to get that. These were really not Islamists in their personal lives. But in 1973, he declared Pakistan an Islamic state. He declared Pakistan an Islamic state. He set up a Council of Islamic Ideology. 1974, he got together with King Faisal, and he helped King Faisal of Saudi Arabia to set up a counter, Islamic nationalism counter, Islamic nationalist counter to Arab nationalism. Arab nationalism at that point was represented by the Ba'ath Party, which was leftist, Nasser, later Saddam Hussein, etc., Assad, rulers of Syria. They were from the Ba'ath Party. Now, they were Arab nationalists, so he helped King Faisal, the Saudi group, to build an Islamic nationalism to counter Arab nationalism very successfully. 6 months later, Bhutto declared Ahmadiyas to be non-Muslim. 1977, he rigged his election, and because of that, a lot of trouble erupted. So he declared Nizam-e-Mustafa. He banned liquor. Can you imagine? Bhutto banning liquor. He banned liquor and he also declared Friday to be the weekly holiday instead of Sunday. So all this was done by a democratic civilian leader, not by an army dictator. It just so happens that 1978, by the time Zia took over fully and got entrenched, he then picked up the baton from here and converted Pakistan into a medieval theocracy. So what do we mean when we say that he converted Pakistan now? He took it forward to becoming a medieval theocracy. So Bhutto had declared Ahmadiyas to be non-Muslim. He now forbade Ahmadiyas to even going to a mosque, also from even greeting fellow Muslims or other Muslims in the Muslim way, I suppose by way of Assalamu alaikum, etc. He also forbade them from naming their daughters after women linked to the Holy Prophet's household. He took it further. Again, he declared his parliament to be Majlis Shura. He then experimented with partyless democracy, and the fact is that he came to believe over time that every change that he was bringing about was ordained divinely. And most of those changes have endured. I will tell you, his name featured in the Article 270A of Pakistan's constitution. You know, when was it removed from there? It was removed in April 2010. That is 22 years and 5 elections after he had died. Until then, nobody had the courage even to remove that. That's the kind of impact he had in Pakistan. So he changed Pakistan fully. He changed the subcontinent fully. All of the subcontinent even now is held to ransom by the forces he unleashed. So just about 6 days before he died, on August 17, he gave his last interview in August 11, not to me, to another publication, in which he said, I want history to judge me objectively. So how do you judge him objectively now? You might say that under him, Pakistan was booming. So as I mentioned this earlier, when I first went to Pakistan in 1985, Pakistanis seemed to be doing much better than India. So at that point, I mentioned in that story of mine, that cover story, that Pakistan's per capita income was 6,000 rupees, all values in Indian rupees, which was 50% higher than India's. India was 4,000 and 3 times higher than Bangladesh's. Today, Pakistan's per capita income is 30-40% lower than India's and even lower than Bangladesh. So Bangladesh, from being 1/3 of Pakistan, has now become about 50% more than Pakistan. That is the price the Pakistanis had paid for Ziaism. Because what did he do? He brought in jihadism, he brought in Islamism, he converted his state, which was a modern state in the 60s. He converted that state into an Islamic medieval style theocracy. After him, many leaders, including a dictator that is Musharraf, many leaders have tried to change it. They've all struggled. So his is the most enduring influence, which neither Democrats nor military dictators have been able to change in his country, which his neighbors, namely us and Afghanistan, have never been able to shake off. Both India and Afghanistan still suffer from the forces, or are still damaged by forces unleashed by Zia. And then global Islamic jihadism is also a kind of permanent legacy that he left behind. That's why I would say that in our lifetimes, the subcontinent's personality, one personality who made the most impact and the most lasting impact, was Zia-ul-Haq. It's unfortunate for Pakistan, its neighbors and the rest of the world, but that's the reality.